So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Scarlet Witch. So let's start the series. You monster. Demon. Spawn of the devil. Killer. Why don't you die? Why do people say this all the time? The last one made poor Naruto, who was just 5 years old, wins. If they really didn't like him, why not kill him and spare him the pain? Naruto suffered every day only for existing. Why? Naruto asked after being struck in the stomach. The man in front of Naruto kicked him in the stomach, knocking him to the ground as he glanced up at the throng and murmured, "I don't understand. Why do you hate me so?" Naruto asked after being impaled with a pitchfork this time, but the wound was not fatal. Naruto's eyes progressively became a deep shade of ocean green as the thrashing continued. The throng did not realize that a strange core energy had taken root around Naruto as they continued to beat and slash the child. The core force that surged around the child was aimed at a peasant with a beer belly. The man was suddenly impaled through his stomach, coughing and spitting blood from his throat. The inhabitants of the Hyde Ninja village reacted after just one step back. Buildings, the earth, and what seemed to be wind all surrounding the child, turning on the throng and slicing, impaling, and destroying the callous multitude. They just screamed a bit before they were slaughtered. Naruto's fist tightened as he clutched the ground, thereby stopping a pair of kunai. In response, the earth instantly sent up a pillar of earth. 2 Jounin and several more leaf nin, including 1 chunin, were brought out a moment later by the thrower of the previously stated kunai. The ninja were just somewhat startled by Naruto's quiet voice as he said, "You've made a terrible mistake, you are going to die," before they quickly dragged him away. Unfortunately, the last thing they noticed are a pair of emerald green eyes that were burning and flashing fiercely. An old guy watched a funny crystal ball from a tower in the center of Hyde Ninja Village, as his hands repeatedly pushed core energy into it. He wasn't alone, though, for the whole Hyde Ninja Village council was seated around him. "See, I told you he was a monster," Fugaka-cha said, his forehead wrinkled and expressionless. "I agree, though I think there is a better option than extermination," Danzo replied, making a tiny gesture with his hands. A few while later, a small, stocky man came in through the large soundproof doors. The man walked to the center and set up a few charts before explaining his goal. "See here, these are the villages with Jinchuriki. They include Kumo, Iwa, Kusa, Sand, Kiri, and Aim," the speaker continued. "Iwa has the Gobi and Yambi Jinchuriki, so we don't need to worry about them. Kumo has the Nibi and Hachibi, they're the ones we need to worry about. Sand has a Chibi, we don't even need to fear them. Kusa has the Sanbi and Akubi. And Aim has the Shichibi. So I've done the calculations and it seems the best way to counter their Jinchuriki, like them we train ours into human weapons, and we need alliances with Sand and Kusa. If the others were to all gang up against, we need them to equal it out." Sarutobi scratched his forehead angrily. "We are not manipulating Naruto like that." Although Sarutobi frowned, he could not prevent them from voting to transform the young, blonde Naruto into a murderer and a weapon. "Yes, we are, let's take a vote. Their situation will surely put them in hell, so please feel sorry for them." "You've made a terrible mistake," Sarutobi stated, repeating Naruto's previous remark, adding that they will unfortunately probably end up as the dead mob. Time skip. A single boy stood atop the skulls of the Hohids, the Yondame's massive stone head, to be precise. His ocean blue eyes were keen, unlike many others, and his dark blonde hair was spiky, falling just below his chin. Someone had given him a hideous orange jumpsuit as a gift, but it had long since been thrown away. He was dressed in a dark gray t-shirt, loose-fitting black pants, and a long scarlet trench coat with black flames at the ends. Similar to the trench coat, Yondame's coat was red and black. The oddity of his outfit was a pair of odd, high-tech goggles that sat on his forehead and were fastened to his head. The aforementioned goggles feature black trim and blue lenses. On a scarlet rag on his forearm, he had fastened his forehead protection. "It's time to pick up my genin team," he told himself, and he turned his foot cautiously. Consequently, a pillar of earth surged up beneath him, flinging him toward the academy. Within the academy, 2 fangirls, Sakura and Ino, vied for the opportunity to sit beside Naruto's friend, who was currently behaving solemnly by occupying the tallest seat and occupying the corner. Forehead. Ino pig. Billboard brow. Dumb blonde. Pink-haired slut. Blonde whore. As the argument became more heated, the girls continued to use disparaging comments. The girl shouted, "Shut up." And everyone looked at her. Hinata was standing up from her seat and scowling at the 2 girls. Ano, Hinata murmured, reverting to her former self, and then she immediately fell asleep on her chair. "Okay?" Ino murmured and then turned back to Sakura, frowning at her. Sakura smiled mischievously and leaped into the seat next to her friend Naruto. Sakura and Ino got into a physical argument over the chair, after Ino shoved her out of it after gasping. If only when it counted, like when they were training to become true ninjas, they could fight like this. By shouting, "Be quiet." From the front of the room, Iruka employed Big Head no Jutsu to suddenly silence everyone. Iruka continued, "Okay, today we gather to assign you to your Jounin sensei." Only Kiba and Chaoji cheered. The Naruto friend leaned back in his chair. You will meet your jounin after lunch, so let's start with Team 1 Tano Ahsoka, Ozu Azula, and Anaki. As his team the last team was called, Naruto's pal remained motionless, ignoring the others. Sakura jumped to her feet and did a little dance when the words alright, it's a Naruto friend, Haruno Sakura, and Sunatsuki, were spoken. Look at Pig's face, he. Sakura gloatedly shouted at Ino, who looked away from the pink-haired fangirl and frowned. Use our sensei do Panther's even grin. Exclaimed the youngster, Tsuki, who was suddenly grinning like a fox or, better yet, like a panther. Oh, Uzumaki Naruto. Wait, Naruto Ruka stared at the page, his eyes widening. He had just finished when someone flew across the room, smacked into the wall, and crashed through the window. The most destructive person on the planet and invincible ninja, as you can see, were two nicknames that Naruto had acquired since he was a little child, which is another reason why people feared him. The teenager, who was 2 years older than the Genin group, was screamed at by Naruto Ruka. As he pulled himself away from the wall, Naruto groaned, oh sorry, I couldn't manipulate the building to move in time. A piece of glass stuck out of his mouth, but if you blinked, you could see it drop to the ground, and the wound would mend in a split second. With a mischievous smile and a pat on the back of Iruka's head, Naruto remarked, so, which group of brats do I have? Iruka claims that the Uchiha, the Haruno, and Suna children. Oh, the younger brother of the Tachi is present. Naruto was scanning the room when he saw Uchiha glaring at him in rage. Ah, I see he still hates his brother, Naruto said, and then he did the most amazing thing the Academy students had ever seen. With a flick of his wrist, the window mended itself, and the glass on the floor slipped back into place. He continued by telling the Genin that he was a ninja, and Iruka said, thank you Naruto. Naruto grimaced and looked about, aware of their boredom, but there were no chairs. A wooden chair materialized from the Academy's wooden floor as he raised his palms. Naruto sank into the chair and put his feet on the nearest Academy desk, instantly falling asleep. Some of the new Genin sweated, but they didn't talk to him. 000. The phrase okay tell me about you and your hobbies and crap like that was not so much a declaration from Naruto as it was a directive. Naruto had already forgotten her name, but the Haruno girl answered, sensei, how about you tell us about yourself so we can understand? Sakura scowled a little, but otherwise ignored Naruto and did what he said. Naruto murmured, no figure it out yourself, and leaned farther on the railing behind him. I'm Sakura, and I like to clean, garden, and... Oh did I say that loud? Sorry, Naruto realized as he looked at Sakura and said, what a boring girl. For a while, everyone just stared at him. Yeah, I like glances at Naruto friend. My dream are 2 glances at Naruto friend then squeals, Sakura said, attempting to conceal her anger, but her left eye twitched. The words what a fangirl brought everyone to a halt once more as they stared at Naruto, who was now staring at the clouds. He glanced at them, then back up, and suddenly understood what he had done. Sakura twitched again but suppressed the urge when Naruto made a feeble apology, saying, oh, I'm sorry that I said that about you fangirl Haruno. Next Naruto turned to the ecstatic Tsuki and shouted. Yes, my name is Tsuki. My dream is to be Hohide, and I enjoy ramen, training, and Iruka-sensei. I detest snobbish duck butt hat dudes. That's correct. Naruto stared at Tsuki without flinching, thinking, to think that could have been me if I had been born 2 years later and never discovered my abilities. Tsuki wriggled under the older teen's stare, and he was appreciative when he aimed it at his companion Naruto. Naruto's friend glared at him before obeying orders, saying, my name's Naruto friend, I like no one thing, I dislike many things like Sakura, my hobbies are training, my dream is to kill a certain man and restore my clan to his former glory. Naruto used the phrase you duck butt to poke Uchiha in the forehead. Naruto smiled and said, I suppose you mean Itachi because I don't know anyone else could have enraged you that much. He received a snotty Uchiha gaze from his Naruto pal. Team 7, under the leadership of Naruto Uzumaki, then formally starts. Boring pink girl in position, I hate you sensei came over a radio in the bush of the Hyde Ninja Village. Nice emo in position, you're dead to me Uzumaki sensei. Sad emo in position, I despise you. The other 3 on the signal moaned in agony and frustration as Naruto screamed, great super fabulous man in position, let's rock the house. The radio wailed. Alright, nice emo and sad emo. Tsuki and Naruto's companion rushed out of their hiding spots and attacked a dark monster behind the cover of a huge oak tree as Naruto issued the order. If you peer closely, you could see a glimmer of enjoyment in the eyes of the cat-like creature that abruptly leaped away. The creature's motion caused the 2 genin to collide in an unfashionable manner, and they both groaned and rubbed the areas of their foreheads where they had struck. Naruto grinned at the 2 people who were ogling him as he came out of the bushes and remarked, see, that's why you wear a forehead protector. The kunai was thrown at the back of the 3 senseis by a Naruto friend who had had enough of the foolishness. Pinky, you're up next, Naruto murmured before heading out once more. Uzumaki-sensei Tsuki warned, and Sakura urged her buddy Naruto. The kunai stuck in his back when Naruto failed to stop it, causing his pal to gasp and anticipate him to sidestep. Slowly, as if dead, their sensei slid forward before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. What? They all looked toward the oak tree in the center of the clearing, where their sensei was sitting soundly, when they heard snoring. What the hell, Sakura shouted, looking from the spot where the clones disappeared to the teenager sleeping in the tree. That son of. As Naruto whimpered Haruno while he slept, Sakura flushed from head to toe. Sensei is having wet dreams about Haruno. How's that possible? Suki murmured to his Naruto companion, and the Avenger shrugged. A mouth formed in Sakura's mouth as Naruto finished, is a fangirl who has no life and is quite boring. They stopped and gazed. That explains it, commented a friend of Naruto. The speech of their friend Naruto somehow roused their sensei, who sat up from his slouched position. And Naruto fell from the tree in the most awesome way possible. Sakura's jaw dropped even further as she watched their sensei comically bounce and fall from branch to branch, until he hit the ground. In the process, they fell on Tsuki, who screamed like a female just before their sensei hit him. When Sakura saw Tsuki writhing under an unconscious Naruto, she said, "He's like one of those comic characters I've read about from one of the Western comics." Later on in the day, the remaining heroes' spirits were unwavering despite the fact that they were covered in scratches and wounds from wandering the streets of Hyde Ninja Village. Their prize was a large fat gold cat named Tona. There was just one hero without any scratches, and he was the oldest and tallest. Sakura scowled, Naruto's friend growled, and Tsuki, well, he passed asleep on Naruto's shoulder, all in response to Naruto's retort, "Oh come on, it wasn't that bad." It was difficult for the child to avoid the tree since the cat, being a cat, could weave around them all. They arrived at the tower, and Naruto threw Tsuki on his butt. The boy in question leaped and shrieked, suddenly waking Tsuki, who was crouched on the ceiling like a terrified cat. The fact that Sakura and her companion Naruto still couldn't walk trees and rivers amazed them. Prior to entering the room, Naruto said, "Nice, you've already got some skill, seems you got competition, Naruto friend." The Hohide and Iruka, a Chunin, were seated in the middle of the room. "Hello Naruto," the Hohide said with an old-fashioned smile. Naruto nodded to his master and former teacher. "You heard right. Naruto was trained by the Sandaime Hohide when he was 10 years old." Heijiji-sensei was Naruto's response, and his three genin swiftly looked from him to the Hohide and back. "Wait, you were trained by the Hohide?" Tsuki said, his expression displaying astonishment. Naruto answered, "Yes, and 2 of the 3 Sannin, you can guess which ones," as he glanced back at the 3 genin behind him. The phrase, "Whoa, we are being trained by a guy trained by a Sannin," was used by Tsuki to pinpoint the particular one. "Which is why you get to go on a C-rank mission, bring him in," Tsurutobi said. Extremely drunk Tazuna, who even held the sake bottle, is shown as the door behind the elderly Hohide opens. "This is Tazuna, you are to protect him from whatever you face, and your destination is the land of waves," said the third. Tazuna yelled at the Hohide, "What is this? I asked for an escort, but all I get is 3 brats and a larger older brat." As he was about to say something else, the man's sake bottle began to shake and suddenly wrapped around his palm. Then, before he could react, the screen doors behind him surged forward, encircling his legs and torso. "I am Uzumaki Naruto, the manipulator of everything. You shall not address me, or my student in such manner." "Old man." He ruins the moment they thought he was being serious. "Yes sir," Tazuna replied, her eyes glowering and sad. Tsuki asked, "What do you mean manipulator of everything? So far we've only seen you do wood, glass, paper." "Oh, I can do much more. I have a bloodline that permits me to do pretty much anything except create life, living humans, and rubber." "Why not rubber?" Sakura asked, perplexed, "Because it's not a solid enough compound to concentrate on." "So you can manipulate the elements?" And Naruto buddy questioned for the first time, really interested. "Yes, as I said, I can do almost everything within plausible limits, like I can pick up one building at a time," Naruto said to the people in the room, one of whom was already aware of his ancestry. In response, Naruto rolled down his sleeve, revealing a bright line that ran from his wrist to his shoulder joint. Sakura said, "What is the sign of you using your bloodline?" "Oh, and I'm virtually immortal. Did I forget to mention that?" was said by Naruto in a joyful tone, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the room. Tsuki pointed to Naruto and said, "What, so you can't die?" "No, I never said that. I said I'm virtually. One thing can harm me, but I doubt it could kill me," answered Naruto. "Anyway, you'll meet him at 8 a.m. at the Western Gate," Sandaime remarked before they all left to get ready for the next day. The next day. "Sensei, are we there yet?" Sakura complained in a nasal voice, and Naruto looked at her in disbelief. "Does it look like we're there? Geez, and you call me an Ino blonde." Sakura looked insulted, but she wisely remained silent. Sakura and Naruto's friend were both equally bored, but since he had to uphold his macho persona, Naruto's friend dared not show it. As Naruto passed the puddle, he pretended not to notice the poorly hidden Chunin. When he swiftly looked over his crew, he realized that Tsuki and his Naruto friend had also observed them, but had told them to wait. They did what they were told, continued, and acted as though nothing had happened. There 5 feet past the puddle when 2 Chunin appear. They were all attached to each other and possessed arms that looked like claws. As they approached Naruto, a pillar of earth materialized between them, snagging their chains and causing them to collide, knocking each other out. Sweat trickled everywhere as Naruto said, "That was easy." He held up an easy button with his right palm. The gang proceeded without hesitation after the brief confrontation with the Miss Demon brothers, only stopping for lunch and dinner. They were now in a small boat, sailing across the water to the wand of waves. Naruto disregarded the core energy traces he barely sensed, knowing they couldn't hurt him. Naruto friend, Sakura, Tsuki, there are several ninja over there, 2 of Jounin level, 1 of Chunin, and the last at Genin. I'll take the Jounin, you take care of the rest, got it? Naruto said to his fellow players. Yes sensei, Naruto friend, and I will take the Chunin. Sakura, can you handle the other Genin? Tsuki asked the Haruno girl, who nodded uneasily but also wanted to show Naruto friend that she wasn't a coward. Naruto asked the hyperactive Genin to brief me quickly on what you can do. As you know, I can walk and tree walk. I know a few Futon Jutsu and 2 Suton and 1 Doton. I have mid-Chunin speed and strength. My core energy is just a bit higher than average, Tsuki said. Naruto nodded, somewhat in awe of the brunette Genin's skills, while his companion viewed Tsuki from a new angle, that of a competition. They got out of the boat and released the sailor as soon as they touched down. Naruto took the lead, followed closely by Tazuna and the 3 Genin. Tsuki shrugged when Sakura said, "Hey, why do you think sensei acts so silly?" As Naruto's friend joined the discussion, Tsuki nodded in agreement and said, "I guess it's his way to relieve stress." Next to Sakura, Naruto remarked, "I guess he has a lot of stress." In order to avoid their sensei hearing, Sakura whispered to Naruto, "Yeah, I mean he must be like the second most powerful in raw strength, second only to the Hohiate himself, though I bet he'd win a fight considering he's immortal." Sakura noticed Naruto walking next to her when she turned to gaze to her right. Additionally, she observed their sensei Naruto leading as she looked forward. "Wait. There was something wrong with that last sentence," replied Sakura. Sakura looked from side to side before it hit her. The monster of mist was scared out of his camouflage socks by her most precious cry. "Sensei, but how are you here and still there, Bunshin no Justu?" stumbled Sakura as she turned to the man leading the trip. "No had Bunshin no Justu," was the first thing Naruto said her before disappearing in a smoke cloud. Sakura shook her head in confusion but continued. Every head, including Zabuza's when he threw his sword, had giant question marks above it. Naruto stated, "I have discovered an occurrence in reality where the situation would be caused to lower your body to the ground to avoid being decapitated." Naruto casually lowered Tazuna to the ground and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it means duck as you say or get down." The genin immediately plunged, understanding. A huge cleaver-style sword swung over their head and became lodged in a tree behind them just in time. On the sword appeared a guy with bandages over his mouth. However, he was not alone because a man of a similar age sat on a limb behind him. He had a large sack of something on his back, but he had no bandage over his lips. Like his counterpart, he carried 2 swords, both with jagged edges down the blade. "Be ready for trouble," the man with the large sword remarked. The man sitting on the tree furiously extended his hand and yelled, "Make it double." To protect the world from devastation, the man with the larger sword said as he tore it from the tree and collapsed to the ground. "To unite all people within our nation," the second dual swordsman said as he flipped off the branch and landed in a squat next to the first. "To denounce the evils of truth and love," was the statement made by the man with the bandages covering his heart. With a dramatic gesture toward the skies, the man wielding 2 swords said, "To extend our reach to the stars above." Zabuza said, shrugging his large sword over his shoulder. Raiga did a backflip after drawing his 2 lightning swords. 7 swordsmen blast off at the speed of light, was the mantra they all chanted together instead. "Surrender now or prepare to fight," Raiga said, raising one of his blades to the sky, which made the sky somewhat darker. "Haku and Ranmaru, that's right." A girl-like figure fell from the same tree, posed with needles in hand, and a small boy protruded his head from the sack Raiga was holding. Everyone's mouths dropped open, except for Naruto, who was yelling and yelling for more. As his squat did an I'm style falls, Naruto said, "Now that was one nice motto we got to make up something like that." Zabuza suggested, "If you give us the old man now, we'll teach later," while fastening his massive sword to a strap. Naruto shook his head and muttered, "No can do Zabuza, we'll just have to fight." Before the 2 could respond, the immortal blew them back with a gust of wind. After falling out of his bag due to the blast, Ranmaru immediately positioned himself in a combat stance and engaged the 3 genin with Haku by his side. Naruto nodded to them and bounded off, pursuing 2 of the 7 swordsmen. 00000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000 Haku said, stepping closer. The Naruto friend smiled mischievously and produced 2 kunai for each hand. Yes, I am the last left. I would very much like to fight you, Haku said, and then he hurled a barrage of ice needles at Ichiha. Naruto buddy effortlessly flipped away, landing a little distance away. Suki growled at being left behind and sprang at Haku, kicking the hunter Nin in the stomach with a flurry of kicks that were all deflected. Haku ran for the Tsuna at a rate he could nearly keep up with, saying, "You are fast, but not fast enough." Before he knew it, he was 5 feet away, face down. Naruto's companion jumped between them before his comrade could sustain any further injuries. Haku rushed to his companion Naruto, who was prepared to stab him with ice needles. Easily blocking it, Naruto's friend retaliated at Haku, dodging another Hunter Nin swing before jumping away. After Haku started going through a series of hand seals, Naruto's friend did the same. When he was finished, his pal Naruto said, "I'm faster." Diandon. Great Fireball. Haku had to stop utilizing his hand seals to prevent a massive flame from igniting a section of his navy battle kimono. Ranmaru, who had been watching till now, subtly stepped into the battle and started hitting Naruto body like a Hyuga. The Avenger evaded all but one blow to the triceps. Tsuki was standing up again, facing his friend Naruto, when he immediately jumped aside and covered him. "I'll make you pay for that," said Tsuki with a smile. He then finished a series of hand seals faster than Haku and his Naruto friend combined. When he was finished, Tsuki yelled, "Tatapa." Great breakthrough. The result was strong for a genin. A tremendous wind gust smashed both Haku and Ranmaru. The two were soon lifted off their feet and thrown into the air, where they landed on a nearby tree. Tsuki smiled as Sakura gaped at the overpowering force of the attack. A buddy of Naruto who had adjusted like that wasn't too happy. "That's right," Tsuki exclaimed, grinning smugly and displaying a hint of boasting. Their joy was cut short when they found out. Subum Fubuki. Snowstorm swallows. About 50 small ice birds were slicing through the air, whistling, all around Tsuki. Naruto buddy leaped forward and executed the hand seals required to execute the Justu he wanted. The cancelling effect was produced when Hausenkan no Justu, mythical fire phoenix technique, prevented the other attack, causing as many fireballs as ice birds to fly from Naruto friend's lips. "Congratulations, Naruto friend-san," but after Zabuza and Raiga left the jungle, Haku had planned to go see how he was doing, but he stopped talking when he noticed that Naruto had come out of it mostly unharmed. "There is no need for further conflict because we are all working toward the same goal. The only thing left to do is..." Once again, a buzzing sound diverted their attention. When Zabuza, Raiga, and Naruto looked around and saw a spherical in the center of the field, they were shocked by how rapidly the sphere grew in size. Before he could respond, Naruto was pulled up into the vortex as the Jounin retreated. The lost nin then disappeared into the woods, saying, "Haku, Ranmaru, we leave." "Sensei." The genin shouted, and rushed toward the gateway, which became a little wider. They all disappeared in the same manner, disappearing into nothing, pixel by pixel. After a tremendous struggle, the last person standing was an old, drunk, and confused man from the seas. Dazuna started at the sound of the mechanical voice, and turned to see the easy button standing alone, appearing just as menacing as ever. He said, "That was easy." Saying, the button pressed itself again. That was easy. Even though he was drunk, Tazuna did the most reasonable thing in this situation. "Mommy?" Tazuna cried and ran away, peeing in his trousers. The easy button chuckled evilly and disappeared in a puff of smoke. It was just another ordinary peaceful day in New York, with people busy walking by one another on the sidewalks and muttering obscenities here and there. Only a few minor muggings occurred today. No serious crimes. That was how Kate Bishop, a new member of the Avengers, liked it. She didn't have to save anyone from a burning building or rescue someone from a hostage situation. There would be nothing to worry about. She could just walk to school and carry on with her day. Sadly, she was mistaken. "Kate!" shouted Cassie Lang, Kate's friend and partner who headed the Young Avengers alongside Patriot. With her blonde hair tossed back and forth in a short ponytail, Kate's buddy approached her as she glanced over her shoulder. Kate asked friendly, "Hey Cassie, how's it going?" "But guess what?" Cassie said, hiding her hands behind her back. "What?" "Jonas bought me a 3-week anniversary ring. Look," Cassie said, holding out her hand to show Kate a sparkling metallic band. Cassie and Vision, his real name was Jonas, had been dating for a week and a half, and called each other boyfriend and girlfriend. The staff lived with the reality that the two were completely in love, nicknames and all, even if it drove them nuts. Cassie and Jonas knew when to stop though, like when on an assignment or doing business. Patriot, his real name was Elijah, was now the team's leader. He inherited his talents from his grandfather. Well, it was a mutant growth hormone, but he later received his true skills from a blood transfusion. He has almost all of Captain America's powers, including a triangle shield. Wiccan, sometimes known as Billy, was more of a co-captain or lancer. Hulking was able to do much more than simply cast spells, because to the self-help book his mother gave him. He could fly and conjure lightning like Thor. The Scarlet Witch, Wiccan's mother, was a formidable, somewhat insane woman with extraordinary powers. Teddy Altman, popularly referred to as Hulking, was the team's endearing big man. Hulking has unparalleled power as a shapeshifter. For whatever reason, he was a Kree-Skrull hybrid, and his father was Captain Marvel. The team's energy boost came from Thomas Shepard, popularly known as Speed. He was physically bouncing off the walls all the time. He and Teddy had a similar sense of humor, which made them best friends. As one might guess, his power was super speed. His power was comparable to that of Quicksilver from the original Avengers, despite the fact that he and Patriot frequently clashed. Designer Jonas, the final male member of the squad, was a cross between the antiquated Vision operating system and Iron Lad's armor. Not much else was known about him, other than he was in love with Cassie. Cassie and Kate were definitely young Avengers, since they were named Stature and Hawkeye. As Ant-Man's offspring, Cassie has the potential to grow or shrink. Kate had been trained extensively in fighting and was a proficient marksman despite her lack of skills. They became best friends and confided in each other about everything because they were the only women on the squad, which takes us full circle to their conversation. Nice. Cass, did you get him something? Asked Kate, glancing at the metal band ring. Cassie nodded. Yeah, I bought him a solitary game so he could play it on his CPU banks. Kate laughed at the thought of Vision playing solitary with himself to pass the time. Nice gift. The blonde glanced at her wristwatch and swore. We better get to school or we'll be late. The two girls were only there for a minute before Elijah raced around the corner, to which Kate replied, Okay, I'm just waiting on Elijah. I apologize for being late, Kat, the young man murmured as he reached them. Kate only smiled and waved dismissively. Cassie grinned and nodded in response to Elijah's assent, saying, No problem, I had Cass to keep me company. Patriot began walking in the direction of the school. Well, might as well leave since we're not waiting on anyone. Sure, just act like you're not the one who we were waiting on, Kate answered, following him, Cassie by her side. As the three reached Gwyn High School, where students were just beginning to arrive, the bell rang. Well, Elijah said, at least we made it. Cassie said, Yup, now we get to go through 7 hours of hell, in a sardonic tone. After sending the two females off to their class, Patriot stated, It's your choice not to be popular, you could have guys eating out of the palm of your hand. 3 hours in class. After barely avoiding being crushed by a falling locker, Elijah sighed. Whether it was because the lockers had fallen or because Elijah had impulsively caught it with one hand before smoothing it out, the viewer's eyes were wide. Saying, that might cause a bit of trouble later on, the young Avenger went inside the lounge, also known as the cafe. The opportunity to eat at the cafe or the cafeteria was another advantage of their education. Most people liked the cafeteria since it was bigger. Teddy, Billy, Kate, Cassie, and Thomas always gathered here to watch the news for educational purposes. Hey Eli, what's up? Teddy screamed out to his friend a bit too loudly, causing Billy to wince. Kate spoke up, knowing Billy wouldn't. Ted, please tone it down. Teddy looked at Billy in embarrassment. Sorry, dude. No problem, you didn't realize it, Billy said, hoping Teddy wouldn't take offense. Hey guys, check out the news, Cassie said as she snatched up the remote control and turned it loud. The anchorman shuffled his papers before he started. Recently 4 meteorites have been spotted heading for the center of New York City, schools are being evacuated, and police are calling in any superheroes they have the number 2, in order to prevent the sheer devastation it will cause. The following picture is the path the meteorites are plummeting. Teddy turned to the others as the man showed them the meteors heading directly for their school. At the sound of the school alarm, Thomas shouted, Okay, school is out. Cassie nodded, and the group rushed out of the school in different directions to change into their costumes after Elijah urged, Guys, get dressed. And Cassie called Jonas. Patriot rushed up behind the school and began evacuating the students and personnel from the line of fire. Hawkeye, Stature, and Hulking appeared a moment later and began helping him disperse the crowd. Now, most of the people had left save for a few reporters and photographers, and the Patriot shouted, All right, team, assemble. Okay, boss man, screamed Hulking, and he jumped to Patriot, landing behind him. A few seconds later, the whole team had gathered around Patriot. Patriot looked to Hulking and Wiccan. You two will fly up there and try to slow them down. Both of them nodded in agreement. Patriot now looked to Stature and Vision. The two will try to destroy or blow them apart if Hulking and Wiccan can't stop them, they both said. The Hulking's appearance shifted in an instant, giving him wings, and he and Wiccan took to the skies. Last but not least, Speed, Hawkeye, and I will ensure the reporters are safe. Now, young Avenger, go. Patriot said. After watching them leave, the other headed to their apartment. Until Hulking dropped the 2 meteorites he was leading and carrying, the plan worked. This maneuver forced Cassie to grow in order to try to grasp them, but she missed and slapped Wiccan, causing him to drop his 2. Finally, as the meteorites hit with more force than expected, the ground shook. The young Avengers gathered in front of the 4 large craters once more, but they were unable to see what was within due to the dust. Spider-Man was handing them upside down from a web line when the teenage Avengers turned to their left. What the hell is going on now? A dapper voice said. Spidey, how's it hanging? I didn't think you'd show up, Speed exclaimed. When Spider-Man replied, Oh well, I'm here so let's face whatever it is together, the young Avengers all nodded and turned to confront the smoke. The ground beneath them abruptly became spiked and tried to impale them, and then a lightning bolt flew past Hawkeye, narrowly missing her. Behind the superheroes, they saw just eyes the color of the ocean, and someone whispered, Where the hell am I now? Who are you? Hulking whirled around and charged at the thinly dusty figure, and the 50-ton green beast was thrown aside like a fly in front of their eyes. As he lifted his shield for battle, Patriot said, Oh, this was going to be one hell of a fight. Where had he gone? Stature shouted, "What the hell, are you an alien?" And the other blonde silted pupil eyes moved to look at her. Did they bring him here? Were his students harmed by them? Rideau's ocean green eyes swept across his enemies. A man in a suit with a red and blue web design, a boy in sleek material, a girl in scant clothing, a large girl, a red-faced boy, a green-skinned dim boy, a boy in a blue suit, and a boy with a scarf. According to Naruto, you dress strangely. Kate's face flushed with anger. Look at yourself, what type of fashion is that? Kate received a quick-looking reply, rather than the angry scream she had hoped for. I sense you are all potential threats, the immortal remarked. The superheroes prepared for conflict. Hulking was able to recover after he foolishly attacked an unnamed enemy. That hurt like a bitch. Hulking, muttered the hulking. Cassie scolded the green teenager with a glare. Teddy only shrugged at the giant chick. What, I'm a teenager? Gazing back at the meteorite man, the girl remarked, yeah, but that still isn't an excuse. Enough. As everyone's attention shifted back to the meteor man, his eyes expressed his frustration. What were you doing in the meteor? Questioned Patriot, who assumed command. Rideau turned and stared blankly at Patriot. Oh, I was just deciding which pair of sock would better fit on the foot of a baby alpaca, only to find out that it was not human, and never knew its mother. The whole group of superheroes was now confused. What the hell? Naruto's eye twitched the instant they failed to recognize his sarcasm. Insignificant idiots. Instead, Hulking shouted, hey, who are you calling useful? At Naruto. Speed shook his head at his friend. Dude, it means not useful. Hulking paused and said, oh, carry on again, before he realized what Naruto had said. Hey. Naruto stopped and stretched by bending and touching his toes. He said, you're stupid, now I will. His last words were, kill you. Now that the superheroes were on watch, Spider-Man, the oldest, took the initiative. Ocean green eyes scanned the crowd for a while, determining who should be hit first. These eyes landed on the man in the spider-themed costume. Naruto took up his combat stance, keeping his legs parallel yet apart. His arms were held almost languidly at his sides, fingers pointing to the sky, and his gaze were as empty as ever. Wiccan sprang several feet off the ground, his open palms crackling with lightning. Speed was crouching a little, getting ready to run, and Hulking was standing in a neutral position, as though nothing were there. He saw his typical stoic self hovering 20 feet above the ground. Stature grew to around 15 feet in height, her hands tightly clasped at her sides. Patriot and Hawkeye both remained in the ready position, their eyes fixed on each other. With his arms spread as wide as possible, Spider-Man lowered himself into his usual combat posture. That said Naruto, a little taken aback that they could be serious when needed. Only Speed was able to keep up with Naruto's lightning-fast moves. An earthen pillar jumped to Spider-Man's defense. The man waited for the pillar to close, then put his hand on the ground and pushed it off, sending him skyward and giving the pillar back to his center. Naruto smiled, caught the pillar off course, and threw it into a nearby structure, utilizing his velocity to shoot an arc of flames toward the group without stopping. Hawkeye snapped back an arrow in her bow and fired, saying, I got this. The modified arrow flew through the air and, just before it hit the flames, exploded into fire extinguisher gel. Hawkeye smiled, but when a foot was thrust into her tummy, she gasped. The girl skidded on the asphalt due to the force of the attack. Patriot let out a terrified Hawkeye yell, and the masked caper whirled to face the male with the ocean eyes and charged. Abruptly losing self-control, he swung his shield violently at the enemy. Naruto effortlessly dodged each swing, but he had to jump back when a lightning strike hit the spot where he had been standing. Ocean eyes suddenly focused on Wiccan. In a matter of seconds, Naruto sprang to the side, grabbed onto a building, and ran along the walls to the top. Standing on the building, he could see Spider-Man yelling. Wall climbing was his thing. Naruto let himself drop swiftly back to the earth after pushing off the building with minimal effort. Unfortunately for Wiccan, he had no idea what he was doing until Naruto slammed him into the ground, knocking him out cold. The sight of his friend's dead body shocked Wiccan. Hulking. Naruto said, one with a faint, but not quite smug, sneer. Hulking hissed and made a foolish rush at the blonde just as the fight had started. Naruto smiled mischievously at the green teenager. Using all of his strength, Hulking threw his fists down on the smaller man, only to hit the tar, causing massive cracks. After scowling and turning to look at the voice, Miss Hulking was hit in the face by a fist. As the adolescent sailed into the air and slammed through a building's windows, Teddy blinked cautiously before turning limp, exactly like Wiccan had moments earlier. When Naruto said the word 2 from his position, Spider-Man, Patriot, and Hawkeye immediately surrounded the blonde. Patriot used a variety of shuriken to start the initial assault, reminding Naruto of his hometown. To the surprise of the group, the blonde blocked each one with a kunai. The blonde then pressed his hand on the kunai and turned it into a sword. The sword looked remarkably light with its curved blade and handle. The sword broke like glass when Naruto swung it at Patriot, but his shield deflected it. Patriot threw his shield at the man, who was easily apprehended. Patriot made eye contact with Naruto before he was covered with some sort of metal. Elijah looked down to find the metal shared the same properties as his shield. Patriot realized he had lost his shield when he turned to confront Naruto, which could only mean one thing. You ruined my shield. Avoiding Hawkeye's arrow, the man with the ocean eyes sneered back and jumped into the air. Hawkeye fired a volley of arrows at the blonde, as he pulled off a series of acrobatic maneuvers to dodge it. When Naruto noticed the change, he lifted his hand in mid-jump, as Hawkeye fired a unique customized arrow with a notch on the back. Naruto was protected from the arrow by a shield of lightning. A massive blast of fire erupted from the arrow. Naruto disappeared and then reappeared before Hawkeye. The girl was merely immortal with a bow, so he slapped the bow out of her hands before she could try to strike back, hitting her in the gut, but not hard enough. Cade whispered crap as she collapsed to the ground, having fainted. Naruto teasingly wiped his hands and said, well, that could count as 3 and 4. Naruto dived as an arm went over his head, leaning back to avoid a roundhouse kick. Naruto identified the child as Speed and easily kept up with him as he continued to swing at the blonde at high speeds. He trailed Naruto, who decided to have some before running at Speed's pace up the wall of a building. Speed continued to kick and punch as they ran up the side of a building. Speed's arm was reaching for his face as Naruto grabbed it as they reached the summit. Then he jumped from the roof and slung the adolescent over his head. He used mid-level strength to spin and throw Speed to the ground as part of his combo. It was like a sonic boom as Speed raced toward the planet with little chance of stopping. Naruto wasn't done, though. He pushed off the building, jumped at Speed faster than he was falling, and punched him repeatedly. As they approached the earth, Naruto pushed off of Speed with his feet, landing on the edge of a wall. Spider-Man set up about 10 layers of webs to slow the child down, but they were useless, and the boy, lucky to have been knocked out in midair by Naruto's beating, hit the ground unconscious. After 4 seconds, Naruto jumped off the side of the structure he was sitting on and noticed 5 visitors. The first was a tall, muscular man in a red, white, and blue outfit, with the letter A on his head and a white star on his chest, both of which appeared to have great meaning. The other 4 looked like they were from the same group, with their navy blue outfits and force symbol. A male and a blonde woman seemed to be related. There was a man with brunette hair and short white sideburns. Finally, there was this man who looked like an orange rock and was overly strong due to the somewhat perceptible muscle on the skin of the orange rock. While the other man was dressed in full bodysuits, he was only dressed in navy shorts. "Who is destroying my city?" asked Human Torch Johnny Storm, turning to Naruto. Patriot looked up at Captain America from his cramped quarters. When the boy said, "Captain America, nice of you to come," there was still a trace of criticism in his voice, although it was much less than before. Naruto flicked his wrist absently as he watched each visitor with little interest, and the blonde looked to Spider-Man, who was now analyzing the other heroes. Peter Parker was able to dodge the first metal tendril with surprising quickness, thanks to his spider senses, but the second one was too close and moving too quickly. "Well," Naruto remarked, closing his eyes slightly, "let's get started now that we have some new challengers." Everyone has secrets, and Naruto was no exception to this rule. Early in life, Naruto discovered that he has the capacity to affect others, due to an odd mutation caused by Nine Demon. But he had not told anyone about the extent of his powers. Naruto was able to use the elements and affect any of the objects in his surroundings, but he had not indicated that he could control his genetic composition. As you can see, it was a fail-safe system. A few years ago, despite Naruto's skill in manipulation, he was struck by a shinobi. Nine Demon was furious because the man had tried to make his container unbreakable, despite the fact that he was legendary Sannin. Nine Demon was furious and granted Naruto additional strength, which enhanced his skills. And when Naruto was assigned to face another opponent of legendary Sannin's caliber, his body adapted. Oh no, I don't mean that it was truly changed when I say adapted. By changed, I mean that Naruto's brain was exposed to information quickly, so that it could adapt to overcome any obstacles, including genetic absorption. Because Naruto's body learned to instantaneously absorb a duplicate of everyone's genetic code, giving him their potential in the process, it was like fighting yourself. Since then, Naruto has gained godlike status in the shinobi community. He seldom used his full power, but when he did, depending on the position of people around him, it either filled them with fear or with optimism. But in this realm, where his abilities only got more powerful, Naruto became one of the few creatures that could not be willed to vanish, making him essentially immortal. Notwithstanding Naruto's vulnerability, which was most likely still present, your only chance is to defeat the immortal. The nicest thing about the ability was that Naruto was aware of what he had adapted to. I'll go back to the story so you can see the ability in action. "So young man, what is it that you are doing?" the captain asked in a hard voice. Naruto shrugged. "I don't causing mayhem and panic. Why? Because I have the power of a god here." Naruto and the superheroes were unaware that the entire battle was being filmed by the news network. In other locations. In ancient Egypt, a chamber was situated far below a pyramid. The crowd inside was large. Along the walls were text and pictures of a large man. One of these people had a mausoleum that hung above the others, formed like a diamond. Some murmured prayers of awakening, while others conversed with people around them. But the talking was centered on the awakening in the grave. A man who had been watching everyone from a block of stone stepped forward and raised his hand above his head. It has begun. Everyone ceased their conversation and focused on the diamond tomb, which was suddenly shining a bright green and making a sound. A second later, the tomb opened and a foot wrapped in navy armored metallic stuff came out. The guy in the tomb was shown the news channel by a follower who stepped forward. The TV displayed Naruto's fight with Spider-Man and the Young Avenger, along with the upcoming conflict with Captain America and the Fantastic Four. "My God," said the follower, who was wearing white, "I think you would be of great power as your most powerful horseman." The apparition stared at the TV for a time before an unpleasant smirk appeared on its face. Leaning forward into the light, the person had a gray face that was almost sickly pale, and it seemed unhuman. His large crimson eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The voice reverberated around the room, perfect with strength and authority. Just perfect. Naruto's ocean eyes stared blankly at the new arrivals, with a slight hint of expectation for the impending clash. Captain America was thinking about how to deal with the new threats, and tried to devise a plan. He looks powerful and swift, and he has some elemental control. Alright, this guy can defeat Spider-Man and the younger Avengers, so I'd better watch out. I face worse, Captain America's statement read. For meters, Naruto just remained still, his ocean blue eyes leaping from superhero to superhero. They're not a challenge, Naruto thought to himself, but they might be. The thing responded, suggesting that Naruto's whisper was a bit too loud. What was that? You blonde chump. Naruto's elevated eyebrows improved the orange rock beast's hearing, but it didn't boost their winning percent. Naruto mockingly remarked, "Yes, that's what I said, Rocky Mountain," with a tiny grin of enjoyment developing on the corner of his lips. Ben frowned, but unlike the hulking they had witnessed moments earlier, he was not a moron and did not charge in. "Sure, say the one with hair so blonde that everyone expects you to suddenly say oh my god." The eyes of Johnny, Naruto, and Susan flickered at that comment, but they all disregarded it, at least Johnny didn't. "Hey, what's that supposed to mean, blockhead? Remember you were blonde once, when you looked human. And had hair. And when you were young." Johnny smiled as Ben scowled at him, and Reed shook his head at the two, before turning back to see the golden blonde who was standing meters away. "Alright, you might as well give up, you haven't got a chance." Even though Naruto had cocked his head to the side as if he was still considering it, they received their answer when he threw his right hand forward, sending a strong rush of wind blasting the five back. "No," Naruto replied. Naruto raced toward the thing first because he thought he posed the biggest threat. After blocking the punch, Ben responded with a series of blows that seemed to be easily deflected. Although he didn't display it, Naruto found it difficult to block the blow as Ben tried to utilize all of his superhuman strength to destroy the blonde. "Why? Swing 1 pound, you smash full." The orange beast stabbed Naruto's head, and the blonde caught it, but it was pushed back, and it was challenging for the blonde because he was only using one hand. Naruto kicked Ben hard in the chest after he lost his balance from his tug on the fist he had captured. Ben flew through the air as an orange blur because the kick was so powerful. Naruto jumped away from the jet flames as Johnny, who was hovering over him, remarked, "Just because I have a hard time stopping your fist doesn't mean I'm weaker." After cartwheeling over Reed's elastic fist, Naruto stopped on his hands and gave Susan a less severe kick to the chest than he had given Ben. Naruto shoved her away and sprang into the air, just above Johnny, saying the flamethrower had barely had time to turn around when a punch was driven into his gut. Despite being flung to the ground by the punch, Johnny was unharmed due to the cushioning effect of his flames. Naruto landed on his feet, and the thing's punch hit him in the face. Naruto spun around on his heels after the blow without losing ground. Then he turned back to Ben and punched him just as hard as he had just been hit. Because Naruto was unprepared, Susan threw a force field at him, knocking him forward but not off his feet. She quickly used another force field to stop the flames, but when she pulled the force field back, Naruto was in front of her because the flames had momentarily blinded her. Naruto launched a spray of flames at her after turning to face her. After being struck in the face with a lightning-powered fist that left a bruise but no burn, she was knocked out like a light. "Susan, I'll get you, monster," shouted Johnny. Naruto's movements faltered when he stopped Captain America, letting the blue, white, and red Crusader slam his shield into him. Naruto was rendered unconscious when Steve Rogers rammed his shield into his face, or when Ben started beating him with his orange hands. He sat there, his eyes glazed with concentration, taking the punishment without getting scratched. Monster. That one word kept coming to him. Regardless of where, when, who, how, and why. Naruto's eyes, blackened by the light in his mental sewage system, looked like a monster to everyone. Why was it him every time? Despite the fact that there were 10 times worse persons in the world, everyone thought he was the pinnacle of evil. "I don't deserve the title." It was true that he initially became aware of his abilities, but he never killed anyone. Naruto never killed a single person during his ninja career. He would bring the victim back to hide Ninja Village, sometimes unconscious and sometimes wounded, but never dead, even during his assassination missions. Do they believe that what about me makes me a monster? I am going to tell them who the beast is. Incredulous, Naruto snarled, "Ask and you shall receive," and snatched up the fist Ben was pointing at his skull. When Naruto knocked the man off him and stood up, eyes hidden once more, the superheroes, except for Susan, formed a line in front of him. Naruto lifted his head to show his eyes and remarked, "Congratulations, you got your monster." They had changed from their very comforting ocean blue to something completely new, and it was a sight unlike any other. Now, they were piercing, brimming with hatred and evil. The most horrifying change was that instead of white or black, there was scarlet mixed with pure pitch black flaming embers surrounding his eyes. His eyes were red and malevolent, like a cat's, with slits of charcoal in them. And terror would flood everybody who looked into his eyes. "Crap, I think we made H." A fist was thrust into Johnny's gut, cutting him off as the Human Torch's eyes slid back inside his head, and he fell, unable to get up for some time. Both Captain America and the other two members of the Fantastic Four were shocked. Reed said the obvious, "I think we need to call in backup," but he was unable to proceed, since Mr. Fantastic was trapped in a small opening, and a tent of street tar around him. Ironically, Ben turned around and slammed his body onto Naruto's in an attempt to damage him, only to be disappointed when he felt as if he had struck a stone. Naruto pushed the man back hard, then jumped up and crushed his heel into the head of the rock thing. The orange rock person fell to the ground like his friends. The reporter and her crew gasped as they watched. She pivoted, lifted the microphone to her mouth, and addressed the country's audience in a somber voice. The Fantastic Four were defeated. It seemed as if Naruto was aiming at Captain America, who was at a loss for what to do, when an ion blast hit the blonde man squarely in the chest. Iron Man landed beside the American flag. "Sorry took me, hard to escape blood-sucking lawyers." "Yeah, nice to see you to an old friend. What is the plan?" Captain America asked, turning to face the blonde adolescent with his back to them. When he turned around again, they were a little surprised because they could see the tiny burn mark on his chest, and they realized Iron Man had the key to defeating this supervillain. "Okay, I made a dent," Tony exclaimed, before launching himself back into the air and charging his unit beam in his breast armor. Naruto's gaze fixed on the red and yellow tech hero as the ion blast was released. Then, as strong as the ion particles, he let off a lightning storm. The beams collided, and the blowback was surprisingly high, as the plasma in Naruto lightning counteracted the ion particles from Iron's chest armor. The blonde had to jump aside as a circular shield inserted itself into the area where he had been, and Naruto mumbled, "Why did he have to use my weakness as a weapon?" Naruto bounced from his hands and landed on his feet before leaping into the air. Iron Man was still clutching the discharging beam when Naruto immobilized him by slamming his heel onto his back and twisting in midair. When Iron Man hit the ground so hard from the kick, his front armor was dented, but his heartbeat gadget remained intact. Captain America, who had been waiting for the child to fall and attack him, was shocked when Naruto turned his now crimson and black eyes on him. Captain America felt himself trembling a bit. "I no longer wish to stay here. Obviously you don't hold my students, so I'll be going," Naruto said, taking away his command of the wind that had been holding him afloat at the moment. Naruto's eyes opened when everyone waking heard the cough, and they were immediately back in the stunning ocean blue. Unfortunately, Tsuki was standing there with Sakura supporting Naruto's friend's other arm and Naruto's friend resting on his shoulder. During all of this fighting, Naruto had forgotten to check the other meteorites that had fallen with him. "Sensei," was what Tsuki cried out. Since they lacked a healing factor and were not eternal like Naruto, they had presumably been injured by the fall. They were joined in a moment by Naruto, who grabbed his companion from Sakura and Tsuki, and draped the raven hair over his shoulder. Tsuki and Sakura, who were breathing heavily, obeyed Naruto's command to grab onto me. They did it without hesitation, with the help of their sensei. As Naruto glanced around, he noticed that the villain was walking away from the villagers who were observing him come out of their hiding spots. The most cautious were Iron Man and Captain America. It was a touch unnerving to see some of them go from villain to teacher in an instance. The ocean-eyed teacher said one last thing to the crowd. "I will be back. Be happy you've got your monster." The disappearance of the four nin was revealed by a brilliant display of flames that flickered out. Tony turned to look at Steve, his eyes questioning. "Did we win?" With a tone of embarrassment, Steve responded, "No. We lost and were spared." Several of the most well-known heroes in this reality were ecstatic about their recent loss. Break. Every criminal in the world had the same idea. "I need his support, and I'll stop at nothing to get it." In a warehouse at the far end of New York City, four persons emerged in a loud snap of exploding flames. Naruto was standing where the fire had started, with his companion draped over the tall blonde's shoulder and Tsuki and Sakura, both of whom were panting and barely able to stand. Feeling worn out, Naruto placed his friend on a sofa covered in plastic wrap, and sat down next to the boy, saying, "Okay team, settle down and find a spot to sleep." The Seraphim, SP. Shells had apparently contained a large object, and Tsuki slipped snugly between them. Sakura sat on the floor near Naruto and his companion, weeping wearily. "Shut up girl," Naruto mumbled, staring at the genin with the pink hair. Pinky lifted her head off the ground and glared at him. "Whatever sensei, I don't have to listen to you anymore. We aren't in Hyde Ninja Village anymore." "Really? Is that what you think?" Naruto queried, his brows narrowing, and Sakura nodded haughtily, as though she knew what he didn't. After glancing at his pal, Naruto sighed. Fine girl, do what you want. Sakura seemed surprised that she had obtained what she wanted and offered her teacher a smug smile that he ignored. Naruto asked, Suki, are you okay? And for the first time he seemed genuinely concerned. The brunette's head lifted from between his knees. Yes, I'm just really tired and I have this ringing in my ears. Naruto nodded to the child and then announced something. Go to bed. Break. Even though X-23 wasn't the most normal girl in the world, she had encountered these kinds of situations often enough to know how to handle them. But now it was just too much, and Emma shot her the most repelled glance she could muster, and the Hellions followed suit. Laura only made one error, which allowed the enemy to move in and take her hostage. She momentarily distracted herself from Lori. Naturally, she was deemed responsible because she was responsible for keeping the ill child safe, while the other repelled Stryker's troops. Emma put one hand on your right hip and shifted your weight to the right, accusing you of doing it on purpose and adding, this is your entire fault, you did it on purpose, you little monster. Laura persisted, and Logan didn't teach a coward. No, it wasn't, and you know that you were in the room too, you were the one to distract me. Julian, his real name was Hellion, rushed forward in a frenzy, his fists clenched and a sneer imprinted on his face. Shut up, you little devil, you kill for fun, so you might have let Lori get captured just for fun too. Laura scowled at Hellion while clenching her hands and holding on to her foreclaws. Thus tried to break up the fight by interrupting. It's no one's fault. She received several glares. Laura came up with 1,000 ideas, but just one was chosen as the most crucial. The group was in an office with large windows, so X-23 took a few steps back before charging ahead. Laura broke through the windows and ran away. When she hit the ground, she dislocated her shoulder, which the girl promptly replaced with a loud pop. She then began to run across the X-Mansion's lawn, off the property. Emma stood smirking as she watched through the glass. Who needs her? She muttered. Break. So you're telling me a kid defeated you all? Asked Dr. Strange as he bandaged Speed, who was seriously hurt. Iron Man nodded, his helmet sitting beside him. He was so powerful and he knew how to use it, speed, strength, intelligence, and power. All that is needed to take over the world. Captain America shook his head in disagreement. Cassie nodded from her hospital bed. The kid isn't the type for global domination, he's more like the villain who could turn hero. I say he was confused, Stature attempted to add, but none of the adults in the room, especially Johnny, took him seriously. The Torch responded, like hell he was, you weren't there when he got angry. Susan was still unconscious as she laid by his bed due to internal damage from the hit. Reed rubbed his swelling mandible. I agree with Stature, he didn't hold that malice until you called him a monster, Johnny. Ben cut me off. So we don't call him a monster, but that doesn't solve the fact he kicked all our asses with other heroes there. Hulking, Hawkeye, and Wiccan all nodded. With a grudge against the people who had physically abused her, Hawkeye suggested, I say we seek him out and try to convince him to the light side, and if not we destroy him. Patriot was using alcohol to massage the cuts from the metal that had previously held his arms. According to Elijah, I say he is pure evil, there is no gray anymore. Johnny was the only one who agreed. Most individuals in the room knew that Wolverine was the greatest superhero, along with the Punisher. Tony stood up and headed toward the open window, Spider-Man following him. Well, I'll see you later, I have a meeting, Tony pretended to say before jumping out the window and taking off. Peter walked back and looked around the room. And I don't have a plausible excuse, so I need to go right one by. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man cried hastily before jumping out of the window, unleashing a web line, and taking off. Before leaving the room, Steve said, okay, you kids get some sleep. Break. Chase, Molly, and Echo couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Molly gasped when the blonde man was knocked off the thing. The runaways sat in a hotel room and watched the news, while the blonde man made fun of the Fantastic Four, Captain America, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the Young Avengers. As he departed with his kids, they realized what they had to do since they thought this man could not be stopped. Molly looked across at the boss. What do we do? Will we go search them out and save those kids? Neko asked Molly, then turned to face their leader, Alex Wilder, and waited for a response. Alex responded, I guess so, we can't just leave them in this guy's care. For those of you who have read the Runaways series, allow me to explain why terrible Alex is returning. Since it took so long to find Alex's subconscious in limbo, Neko's summoning spell to bring him back was unsuccessful. The primary problem with the spell was that it failed to differentiate between Gibram and Alex. After learning some of the Giant's techniques, Alex was no longer the team's weakest physical attribute. Don't worry, though. Contrary to Neko's first assumption, Alex did not develop powers that would enable him to conquer the world. Alex has no superpowers. All she has gained is teleportation, strength, and resistance to physical injury. He initially wandered off on his own after being turned away by the Runaways. But he came back in time to give Jerd a knife to the stomach, saving her life from a burning building. Then Alex grabbed Jerd and his young father from the fire, the knife still in his stomach. Neko kissed him for what she thought was the last time since she thought he was dying, but he was okay, and the knife didn't even fall deep enough to his stomach. Neko and Alex were reunited, and the team was rebuilt as they kissed in front of a burning building, while the others watched. The report said that, except for Caroline's departure with her female fiancé, the runaways were once again whole. Alex discovered that nobody was aware of the Skrull's actual gender, which was most likely male. Anyway, enough explanation, let's return to the conversation. I failed to mention that Victor, Voltron's son, was brought on board a week ago. Victor smiled and said, yeah, let's go teach the guy he's not a god. What prevented him from being accepted? Chase nodded from the leapfrog and revved the motor. Break. While Naruto was deep asleep, something exploded through the roof, causing Sakura to scream before being crushed by a piece of debris. I know that killing Sakura that way was lazy. I could have had the leapfrog land on her. I'm sorry, but I just don't like her. Naruto awkwardly used the word sweet as he looked at the spot where Sakura had broken. Suki and his friend Naruto were standing with their kunai ready in an instant. The fugitives fell from the leapfrog, and Alex stood in front, staring very casually at his ring. The leader with the spectacles looked up and drew them back on the bridge of his nose. Neko was standing beside him, the staff of one ready. Old Lace was frowning at Naruto when Jur placed a hand on her head and patted her. Power surged from Victor's clenched hands. Molly grated her teeth as the familiar glow of purple around her. As he spoke, Alex smiled. So you going to come quietly or what? Naruto smiled and adopted a Taijutsu posture in response. I say what?